Hello there, I'm Vic Baines.
And I'm Rick Ferguson. And together, we're going to introduce you to a different way of thinking about futures and about threat prediction, talking about Project 2030 scenarios for the future of cybercrime. So first, just a little bit about what it is actually that we're talking about. What is Project 2030 scenarios for the future of cybercrime? Well, it's a white paper. It's actually a white paper that we are publishing today, so it'll be available for you to download and peruse at your leisure. We aim to give individuals, enterprises, and even nations a reasoned and rational indication of a possible future, which should enable them to devise a more nuanced, long-term strategic direction. The scenarios that we have created are wide-ranging and extremely diverse, so much so, in fact, that we couldn't reasonably expect to have set all of the predictions in one single real-world nation. So instead, what we've done is set them in the fictional nation state of New Saint-Gobain. What that does is it gives us the scope to bring all our possible futures together in one place. The fictional New Saint-Gobain has many parallels in the real world. For example, the digitally engaged and very open Estonia, who've been advocating digital identities and e-residency and other innovations since about 2014. Also think of the highly privacy-minded legislation of the European Union, like GDPR, and maybe the recent focus on, let's say, homegrown telecommunications infrastructure projects that we see in the US and some others, to name but a few. So there are many parallels for New Saint-Gobain in reality. But what we are describing in the white paper is a future that, while it is plausible or even probable in many parts of the world, it's not necessarily inevitable or even possible in all of them.
We should probably also tell you a little bit about the prehistory of Project 2030. The project has its origins in an earlier scenario exercise that I led at Europol's European Cybercrime Centre, EC3. Now, as the name suggests, Project 2020 set out to anticipate the future of cybercrime in 2020, and we published a white paper in 2013 in which we described how technological developments could plausibly be incorporated into people's lives, into businesses and to governments, and the possible threats arising from those and the implications for cybersecurity stakeholders around the world. So as soon as we arrived at 2020 in real life, Rick and the team at Trend Micro asked me to review how we did. Although scenarios are not the same as linear threat predictions, in hindsight, the future we described turned out to be really quite accurate. And in fact, the overwhelming majority of the threats we envisaged were present in some form, at least, by 2020. You can read our full review report at 2020.trendmicro.com. But in short, the results suggest that it is possible to anticipate the evolution of cybercrime by mapping what we already know about criminals and other hostile actors against plausible developments in emerging technologies. And this means that, as much as we would all agree that the future is indeed uncertain, uncertainty is no longer a good reason for failing to prepare for future cyber threats. Now, projecting into the future requires a starting point. And following the same methodology that we used for the earlier Project 2020, we conducted a baseline assessment of current cyber threats and enablers and other key features of the cybersecurity ecosystem. I reviewed quite a lot of analysis, actually, published by international organizations like my old agency, Europol, Interpol and the United Nations. And you'll be unsurprised to hear that in 2020, COVID-related cyber threats loomed quite large in their assessments, in addition to the more usual concerns of state-sponsored activities, APT, financially motivated cybercrime, and other threats.
I focused on baselining the community that I am more familiar with, which is the cybersecurity industry. I am sure that many of you are already painfully, in some cases, familiar with the annual cybersecurity predictions published by many of the vendors in this space, varying degrees of relevance or helpfulness. I think we all realize that while some of them are doubtless, let's say, guided by the marketing and the product roadmap of the vendor in question, they are also, hopefully very often, informed by a great depth of threat data, industry expertise, and research expertise in cybercriminal underground activity. So I attempted to sort out this wheat from the chaff when I was synthesizing all of the 12-month horizon predictions that for 2021 that had already been published in December of last year, which is when we wrote these sections of the report. Because what I wanted to do was to come up with an idea of where the weight of industry agreement lay. Obviously, as with the research that Vic previously mentioned, a lot of this has, the 12-month horizon predictions, has focused on the importance of the rapid changes to working practices engendered by the global pandemic, the working from home, the pushing of services into cloud and rapid adoption, expansion of cloud technologies, but also the mainstreaming of emerging technologies and the acceleration of effort and, in some cases, cooperation between organized criminal and nation-state cyber operations.
So once we established our baseline, next we had to identify key technological developments and drivers of change towards that timeline of 2030. And we conducted extensive horizon scanning of hundreds of items of open source media, academic research papers, and technology patents. So working to that 2030 timeline, we set ourselves the task of determining whether each of these technologies would be mainstream or still emerging in 2030. The COVID pandemic, of course, also put paid to running in-person expert workshops as we had for the previous project. So we had to test these timelines through an invite-only survey of over 100 practitioners, most of whom work in security or privacy fields. Mapping these technological developments in a single world allowed us to identify linkages and interdependencies, also barriers to adoption and possible points of acceleration. So essentially, it's a creative process, but it's grounded in a scientific methodology. And already at this stage, several key drivers and impacts of technological change became evident, including greater automation, expanded application of machine learning and AI, data as a supply chain component, cyber-physical convergence in humans as well as businesses and critical infrastructure, advances in neurolinguistic programming and generative adversarial networks for synthetic humans, immersive environments enabled by AR, VR, and similar technologies, additive manufacturing in the form of 3D and 4D printing, and of course, proliferation of the massive Internet of Things boosted by 5 and 6G. So, how exactly does that play out for the individual in our vision of 2030? Well, our individual is a woman called Rusilla, who lives with her kids in the fictional city-state of New Sanjoban. And these are just a few of the features that you can see of her scenario narrative, which you can read in full in the white paper. Rusilla works from home, and she plays now in the center of the city in what used to be office space. Wearable technology identifies her nutritional and medical needs, and this is aggregated with other data sets held by her healthcare, fitness, and retail providers. Those technologies have alerts that prompt investigations, drug administration, but also measures aimed at behavioral change, such as making fatty foods or alcohol invisible in her online grocery store. Additive manufacturing is present in the home in the form of 3D printed food. Immersive technology is used at work, at home, and in school. And even more so than in 2020, instant access to the world's knowledge means that children no longer need to learn anything. Education is now focused on processing rather than acquiring knowledge. Neural implants, first used for medical applications, now progress to recreational usage. And digital selves that outlive the death of the physical person have become more prevalent. In the scenarios, we've called these infini-me's. And while the first generation of these beings tended to repeat a restricted set of interactions based on data that they had been fed in the physical human's lifetime, the latest versions in 2030 are self-learning, and they're able to engage in new experiences based on physical humans in their closest peer and interest groups. So increasingly, these digital humans also have agency, particularly as the physical and digital worlds combine. They can engage in inappropriate and even criminal behavior. And grieving relatives are seeking legal remedies to prevent loved ones being switched off or to ensure that they are.
I'm already imagining the security nightmare of not only having to secure your organization against all of the people that currently work for you, but in a possible future of having to secure it against all of the people who have ever worked for you, and perhaps all of the people who have ever lived. So really represents like an exponential growth of the challenge. When it comes to enterprises, we focused in this white paper on a manufacturer, and that's who Rusilla works for. She works for a company called Corlo, Consolidated Rubber and Logistics. They are a heavy manufacturer with a 200-year heritage. So think something like Michelin, for example. Retooling their production lines during the great pandemic of 2020 brought the organization firmly into the healthcare supply chain, and their work on self-healing polymers sees them operating environments ranging from the bottom of the ocean with telecoms cabling to the edges of the atmosphere in satellite communications. As such, they fall into a recently enlarged and actually ever evolving classification of critical national infrastructure as a key supply chain manufacturer. So in addition to that, monitoring of both this supply chain and also in-house enterprise operational technology environments is now entirely digital, and it's enabled through largely private 5G networks where real-time asset condition, maintenance and hazard monitoring and associated operational intelligence is constantly delivered in real time to digital twin infrastructure. This means that production can be streamlined and made more efficient. And it also means that accurate preventative maintenance is enabled and applied to preempt disasters or problems that may happen in the workplace. But it also means that it hugely expands the attack surface. In addition to the exposure of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of connected devices, sensors, services, actuators from a vulnerability perspective, Corlo also have to manage the dynamic authentication and secure provisioning of machine-to-machine and industrial Internet of Things and massive IoT devices in highly sensitive environments where no direct human interaction is actually possible. The 4D printing that Vic mentioned previously means that Corlo now designs and produces various products from heart stents or arterial stents for use inside the human body to flat-packed items for near-space transit. And 4D printing means that these items are programmed to change form or shape or function depending on external stimuli such as GPS. So what this has done is it's led to the merging of traditional DevOps processes with the more industrial and physical processes involved in manufacture. Corlo calls this hybrid converged process DesOps, DesignOps, or MakeOps. From a threat perspective, of course, intellectual property theft remains a traditional concern for manufacturers in 2030. That hasn't gone away. But as well as this thriving market for stolen intellectual property, the possibilities of competitive sabotage by less scrupulous competitors or even nation states means that data manipulation attacks have become a rapidly growing issue. With so much of the design process now automated, poisoning of data lakes or of algorithms directly leads at best to suboptimal functioning and at worst to real physical harm.
Now, if we're thinking about this world of 2030 from the perspective of the state, you can perhaps already guess at some of the preoccupations of the government of New Sanjoban, or NSJ, as Rick and I have come to call it. NSJ is characterized as very much at the forefront of tech development and adoption. And given citizens' apparent willingness to aggregate data from different sources to benefit their health and well-being, governments all over the world in 2030 are continuing to grapple with popular concerns over surveillance, privacy, and the notion of a single digital identity for government services. In the government scenario narrative, we highlight a positive example of big data analysis incentivizing good behavior in a smart city context, but also the potential for unfair treatment as a result of cross-profiling. And in this smartest of cities, bans on single-use plastics and fossil fuels drive integrated energy and very innovative transport solutions. NSJ is also an entirely cashless society with a national digital currency that doesn't offer anonymity, crucially, and we trace the impact of that on criminal markets. Now, the preoccupation with infrastructure, supply chains, and techno-nationalism that we've already seen in 2020, that plays out differently in different countries in the world of 2030, with some countries able to benefit from homegrown 5 and 6G components, but others restricted to suppliers from so-called approved countries. Meanwhile, measures aimed at curbing foreign influence operations by detecting faked or altered video are at odds with the public's acceptance of AI-generated content and synthetic influencers. Influence operations are now fully fledged conversations, which are all the more persuasive in immersive environments in which data appears before one's very eyes rather than on a screen at arm's length. As regards international relations, multilateral agreements against the criminal misuse of IT do solve some problems, but not others. And in our 2030, the appropriate controls for fully autonomous weapon systems are still being debated, and that creates a number of loopholes in practical terms in operations. Finally, some of the biggest uncertainties for the state concern data storage and processing power. So we include as emerging the practice of data storage in DNA. And while we deliberately leave a question mark hanging over the precise date of quantum decryption, we highlight some of the key considerations for governments as that event nears.
So that's a brief look at some of the things we outline in the scenarios, the 3 scenarios in the document. But of course, one of the major points of this exercise is to try and anticipate the criminal activities and opportunities that arise out of this kind of society. They fall into some very familiar general categories, the kinds of criminal activities that we have envisaged. They revolve around unauthorized access or intrusion, unlawful interception of communications or data transfer, unauthorized exposure of data, manipulation of data, as I mentioned previously, denial of service, we continue to see, and disruptive activity, misuse of processing power, something we already see in cloud in 2020, extortion, of course, that's never going to go away, and the growth in influence operations that Vic was just talking about. As is the case now, a single cyber threat business model may engage in a number of these activities in sequence or even simultaneously, just as ransomware today using a double extortion tactic needs unauthorized access to data and denial of service as leverage, and also secondary leverage in the form of the threat to publish stolen data. So we will see that kind of trend continue absolutely through 2030, operating in multiple different threat scenarios. One of the big differences over the next decade is that it promises to be one in which repetitive operations are much more automated, more than ever before, and machine learning advances to the extent that all organizations in all sectors of society will make use of artificially intelligent tools. And this inevitably will include threat actors. In particular, I think it's reasonable to assume that highly automated reconnaissance, target selection, penetration testing, and delivery of pre-packaged victims, if you like, to cyber criminals will absolutely be the norm, and that they will seek to maximize the effectiveness and efficiency of their efforts by using tools that are capable of unsupervised learning. So really a strong march in criminal adoption and innovation around machine learning. AI-powered attacks will also inevitably be supported by more advanced obfuscation techniques, also perhaps boosted by AI. Self-learning fast flux tools for evading data capture and attribution are actually the logical evolution of existing anonymizing services. But as in the current debate around AI-powered cyber defense, hands-off cybercrime, AI-powered cybercrime, is likely to provide unintended opportunities for its disruption if its operations are not entirely understood by the people who are using those tools. As Vic mentioned, in a world where information is delivered into citizens' immediate line of sight through heads-up displays or AR, then data manipulation can be harnessed for influence operations and disinformation purposes, a huge evolution over what we have seen in recent years. Subsequent iterations of what we've called algorithmic optimization, superseding SEO, whether they're benevolent or malicious, may have greater power to alter belief systems. And social engineering as a threat vector may likewise be harder to resist in environments where the immediacy of the experience will prompt quicker reactions and a reduction in critical distance from the thing that you're experiencing. In a truly massive Internet of Things environment, successful cyber attacks will also result in disruption not only to manufacturing and logistics, but also to transportation, healthcare, education, retail, and the home environment, and many others. In the context of the additive manufacturing, specifically 4D printing that we were speaking about, disruption or denial of service to sensors could result in products not changing shape or changing state as intended. The 2030 envisaged in the scenario narratives is one in which edge processing and analytics empower things to be self-routing and self-altering. In this future, also one of increased self-learning and autonomy for algorithms, our current appreciation of insider threats may also need to evolve. Currently understood to refer to a human's risk to an organization, the insider threat of 2030 could just as easily be an object or an algorithm.
In the white paper, we have a dedicated section about what this means for cybersecurity stakeholders. And in the first instance, of course, that means that there will be changes to the business of cybersecurity. In a future of AI, cyber attack, defense, and incident response, the role of humans will evolve, and it will have to evolve. So security professionals will most likely focus on strategy and policy setting, performance monitoring, and explaining actions taken by automated actors. As one survey participant who responded to us remarked, within 5 years, SOC analysts will be data scientists. We envisage that it's also a future of security and identity on the edge, because a future of billions of objects connected to 5 and 6G, that massive Internet of Things that Rick mentioned just now, edge processing, edge analytics, truly distributed cloud computing, everything as a service, demands an end to cybersecurity's historical preoccupation with perimeters and with network-based protections. The world in our scenario narratives also contains greater integration of digital identities across devices and services. synthetic identities that do not map to offline humans or to devices, and even more opportunities for humans to alter their identities according to the situation. It's a future also in which we have embodied cybersecurity. What do we mean by that? Well, the potential psychological and emotional impact of threats and cyber-enabled violence delivered via immersive technology may result in the information security workforce of tomorrow working more closely with mental health specialists on emergency response. And similarly, information security professionals will be required to investigate physical injuries and deaths involving connected healthcare devices. As another of our survey participants put it, cyber attacks will be about losing humans, not data. At the same time, already in 2020, we're seeing indications that everything is cyber now. Against a backdrop of growing techno-nationalism and flexing of digital sovereignty, information security professionals can expect even closer scrutiny of their procurement choices in the future. And if we stay on the same trajectory, the trends for techno-nationalism and digital sovereignty will pose challenges to truly open markets and will remove forever the prospect of a truly global internet. The scenarios also highlight the risk of even greater technological disparity. It's unrealistic in the extreme to assume that the advances described in the narratives will be available to the same degree in all parts of the world. Taking quantum computing as just one example, the world's largest technology companies and the best resourced research institutes are the pioneers in this space and are preparing to lease quantum processing as a service. So the balance of quantum power will therefore be held in a comparatively small number of geographical locations, with a potential trickle down to those who can afford it, raising the possibility of even greater disparity between the tech haves and the tech have-nots. And such disparity would also manifest in an exacerbation of those cybersecurity capacity gaps that we already see in 2020. Now, in recent years, high-profile data breaches and privacy scandals have demonstrated the global public's moral and ethical expectations of tech. And there's no reason to expect that the world's population will be desensitized to these issues in the coming decade. On the contrary, it's plausible that even greater emphasis will be placed on technology, including that used by information security professionals doing the right thing. When it comes to minding the regulatory gap, the scenario narratives describe the possibilities and risks of a truly AI-enabled life, which will be more intrusive by virtue of the sheer frequency and extent of its data gathering. And this prompts the question of whether existing data protection regimes will be fit for this kind of future, or whether additional legislation will be required to protect citizens from ubiquitous surveillance. The majority of our survey participants agreed with the statement that by 2030, countries will launch cyber attacks on each other by mistake and with no human intervention. So that's something else to be thinking about and keeping us awake at night. And finally, in 2020, the accepted notions of truth, trust, and authenticity are already under threat. The world of 2030 depicted in our scenario narratives highlights the need to introduce new measures to assist citizens in distinguishing fact from fiction and honesty from dishonesty. So in short, scams will be more compelling. And it may be necessary to make unprecedented efforts to improve citizens' critical thinking, or at least to encourage a post-trust appreciation of the truth. Equally, technical authenticity tools could well become more important.
So what does that mean for you? I know that it's a full-on RSA tradition, nay, requirement to have a what does this mean to you slide at the end of the presentation, so you can guess that we're already very close to the end, because here it is. The major point behind this exercise was to prepare and release a white paper, a research document that would enable its audience, that's you hopefully, to elevate your planning horizons beyond the next 12 months or maybe beyond the next 2 to 3 years, to lift yourselves out of a constant firefighting mode, which unfortunately seems to be the lot of certainly cybersecurity practitioners at the coalface, and also of many CISOs that I speak to. It seems to be a constant firefight, particularly right now as behavioral patterns have changed, as we've seen a move away from data center centric usage patterns to cloud usage patterns that I mentioned have been accelerated by this global pandemic, and what the workplace has been changing. We've been bringing work devices into home networks like the one I'm sitting in right now while I'm talking to you, and finding new ways to do business, new ways to communicate. And so that it means that the security response is in this constant firefighting mode. What we want to help you achieve through this white paper is to maybe put a framework around the coming next 10 years of technology. Obviously, we don't intend to be able to predict everything, but certainly the white paper is extensive, and we hope that it offers you at least a framework that you can begin to hang a long-term plan on, of which technology areas are worthy of more strategic investment, which require further planning, and maybe even areas where you don't need to focus as much that you perhaps thought you did. So the report is there for you to read through, to digest, to extrapolate from, to work out which is going to affect you in your industry and your customer base. We would encourage you also to join the conversation with the hashtag Project 2030. There's plenty more coming this year from Project 2030, and we hope to engage all of you in a community discussion of the points raised in the document, and of course many points that we probably never even considered, that you bring valid and valuable input from your own industries. So follow that hashtag, take part, join the conversation, and look out for much more content coming that we will share with you in the coming months. I want to thank you all on behalf of myself and Vic for joining us in this presentation. I'm only sad that we couldn't do it in person, but I'm sure we all feel the same way about that. I hope that we've been able to hit your questions as we've been going through the chat. If any further questions do come up that maybe you didn't want to ask in public, or they occur to you after the event, you can reach out to either Vic or myself, or both of us, on Twitter. She is Cyberbanes and I am Rick_Ferguson, or grab us on LinkedIn or whatever your social network of choice may be. And we are here to have a conversation with you and to learn from you, as we hope that you can learn from us. And again, thank you very much for joining our presentation today.